question, Lord Speaker.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
The government places additional taxes on the extraction of oil and gas, with companies engaged in the production of oil and gas on the UK continental shelf subject to headline tax rates on their profits that are currently more than double those paid by other businesses. To date, the sector has paid more than $375 billion in production taxes. All taxes are kept under review and any changes are considered and announced by the Chancellor.
My Lords, the primary cost of producing oil, gas and green energy has hardly changed. Only the selling price has, resulting in excessive profits without any additional effort for the companies. A windfall tax is needed to help hard-pressed households. Why is the government so wedded to its ideology rather than helping the people?
Well, my Lords, the noble Lord's correct to talk about price fluctuations in the sector. Of course, in spring 2020, the price of oil crashed to below $20 a barrel, and that year saw investment in the sector at an all-time low. So an abrupt tax change would create further uncertainty and potentially undermine significant investment in that sector. However, the government does remain committed to supporting households with the cost of energy, and that's why we've set out plans to do so.
My Lord, instead of threatening companies like Shell, BP and the other major companies, would it not be more sensible in the interest of UK Limited to recognise that we need those companies to pioneer work in the new areas of supply for fuel and power, particularly areas like hydrogen, etc.?
Well, my noble friend is absolutely right, and in fact the North Sea Transition Deal is a global exemplar of how government can work with the offshore oil and gas industry in partnership to achieve a managed energy transition.
My Lords, following on from the noble Lord Naseby.
As President of the CBI, we feel that a windfall tax isn't an efficient way, as it puts investments at risk from companies that are key to our transition to net zero. Would the government agree with that? And secondly, would the government agree that this is absolutely the wrong time to have our tax burden at the highest level in 70 years, when businesses have suffered so much through the pandemic? Won't it stifle what is already a fragile recovery?
Well, my Lords, the government would agree that an abrupt tax change could put at risk investment in this sector. As regards to the overall tax burden, whilst it's high, we've had to take certain decisions to aid our recovery from the pandemic when we saw the government put so much support in place during the pandemic, but also we need to recover, for example, through getting on top of NHS waiting lists.
My Lords, the noble Baroness, the Minister, tells us the Government are concerned that a windfall tax will deter companies from investment. So let's look at that. Right. So the Norwegian Government taxes companies at 22% and adds 53% for those who operate in the North Sea. We apply 40% tax to profits, but we have massive rebates for investment and for decommissioning, with the result over 5 years, 19 companies who operate in the North Sea have paid no tax at all. No tax at all. So the Norwegians have no problem getting corporate investment in the North Sea. Why would we have any problem getting corporate investment in the North Sea if we took some of these unearned profits this year to help poor people with difficulties in paying their own energy bills?
Well, my Lords, I'd like to be absolutely clear that the government has put in support to help people pay their energy bills, and that is something that we are spending around £9 billion on. The noble Lord is right that the UK does provide tax relief for decommissioning costs, and that's something that it has in common with Norway. Of course, different oil and gas fields are at different levels of maturity, and they have different costs relating to further extraction, and that is something that is reflected in our approach with the North Sea oil and gas fields that we have in the UK.
My Lords, despite fine words on net zero, it's nigh on impossible to get accurate picture about the amount of money oil majors spend on renewables. The little we do know shows that their words pay lip service only. Eni spent less than 2% on investment in renewables, and Shell and BP similarly derisory amounts. It really is time to stand up to them, tax their extreme profits and use the money to help people who are having to make desperate choices between heating and eating.
Well, my lords, I'm afraid the government doesn't agree with the noble lady's approach. However, where we do agree is the essential nature of providing further support to households who are struggling with their fuel bills. That's why we're providing a £150 cash rebate for homes in council tax bands A to D. That's about 80% of all households, and a further £144 million of discretionary funding to councils to those households who would not otherwise qualify for that rebate.
My Lords, if we're really concerned about the cost of energy to poor people in our country, would it not be a good idea to remove the green levies which exist on their bills and which are adding to them? Surely it is naive beyond belief to imagine that we can do without gas and oil in the immediate future. And the reason that prices are so high is because we are not able to produce enough of our own gas supplies. And that requires investment, and that means not taxing the people who are capable of doing that, surely.
Well, my lords, my noble friend is right that in the short to medium term we will continue to need oil and gas supplies, and that's why the government thinks it's important that investment continues to be made in our oil fields. But we also need to fund the transition to a net zero economy where we move more towards clean and renewable energy in the longer term, and that's why we have programmes such as the North Sea Transition Deal to do that in a managed and orderly way.
My Lords, let me be absolutely clear. The Labour Party would immediately implement a windfall tax on oil and gas profits. Unlike the government's buy now, pay later scheme, our plan would provide a genuine £200 off most household bills, with targeted support for £600 for those who need it. The Chancellor will make his spring statement in a month tomorrow, just weeks before the energy price cap is hiked. Will the government use that occasion to do the right thing and adopt Labour's proposals?
Well, my lords, whilst Labour may say it would impose a windfall tax immediately, its proposals wouldn't then pass on the support to consumers immediately. It would take far longer under their plans to get money into people's pockets. Furthermore, Labour's plans for a VAT cut would not target support at those who most need it, with some of the wealthiest households saving the most money under their proposals.
My Lords, surely the government agrees that the long-term future has to be renewable energy, and yet at the moment the oil companies are putting out that 20 to 25% of our energy bills are coming from green levies, when in fact the figure is 8. This cannot be the moment that we take our foot, so to speak, off that particular gas. So will the government give the House a guarantee that they will not reduce the green levy, that in fact they'll look to increase it so that we do not end up in these problems again and again and again?
Well, my lords, I wouldn't speculate on the green levy or any other tax or levies outside of the budget process, but what I would say to the noble lady is that we do remain committed to our transition to net zero, and whilst we do recognise in the short term we need to continue our oil and gas supplies, in the longer term we need to move to greener forms of energy.
My Lords, does the Minister recognise that between 2010 and 2020, real energy bills for consumers fell? That was in significant part because of the green levies, which helped to reduce energy consumption, quite contrary to what the noble Lord on the government privy bench has just said. So will she ensure that we do not cut these energy-saving levies? And will she make absolutely clear that what is driving up prices is the cost of fossil fuels, not of renewables and green levies?
Well, my lords, I believe I've already answered a question about the level of the green levy on bills. However, I've also given the reassurance that the government is committed to its net zero targets, and that does involve a transition from fossil fuels to greener forms of energy, and that's why we have a plan in place to do so.
Will my noble friend agree? Will my noble friend, you've just had the Minister, my Lords, the Minister that it is only this sector where the industry is not paying for future infrastructure. Will she ensure that rather than funding renewable energy through green levies, the companies will be able to go to the market and fund them in the usual way?
Well, my Lords, the Green Levy on bills is in place to help move the transition towards more renewable energy sources, and it's been successful in doing that so far, and the government remains committed to that transition.